absolutely delighted because we're heading to our last speaker, a very special speaker. And of course, today we've been graced by Guide's presence as well as Zai has given us so much value. I'm so delighted to be talking to you, to be doing this role today, to facilitate our last speaker for the day, Jennifer. We had a conversation, and when I reached out to her, she said, I am so happy to support you, and I love the aspect of inclusivity. And I was so delighted by her response and that willingness she showed, that sense of openness she showed. And I'm so grateful that I got this opportunity to facilitate this process for her. You know, in life, we go through several different challenges. And often these challenges make us question about ourselves. I'm sure many of us would have been put in situations where we had to stop and ask ourselves, what should I decide? Should I trust myself or should I trust the environment around me? Should I listen to what my mother's saying, what my father's saying, what my society says, what my friend says? Or should I listen to something even more important? A sense of voice, a sense of intuition that is deep within us. Our speaker for the day, Jennifer Sirag, is one such person who had an immensely challenging situation in her life. And that's when she decided that she has to listen to herself. And she takes, just like Sai mentioned, turning your pain into power, she takes that experience to enlighten people around in order to start believing in their own sense of intuition. Let me read out her profile to you. Jen is an intuitive medium, energy healer, qualified spiritual coach, and inclusive yoga teacher. Her extensive life experience and sincere passion to serve and empower others creates a truly one-of-a-kind healing experience. She offers powerful yet gentle approach to spiritual growth and healing. A natural-born empath and a teacher, she has hosted a variety of workshops centered around wellness, including self-love, setting and maintaining healthy boundaries, inclusivity within wellness community, and many more. She has safely and gently guided many clients to gain deep insights through intuitive readings, energy healing, spiritual coaching sessions. Jen believes the best approach to life is through balance of mind, body, and spirit, and is passionate about making health and wellness inclusive and accessible to all. It is an absolute privilege, Jen, to seal off our discussion that we've been taking over for the past 7 days with something as powerful as intuition. And I want to hand over the stage to you, Jen.
Great. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay. Lovely. Well, first of all, I want to thank you so much for that warm introduction. And it's been such an honor to be a part of this entire movement. When you reached out to me and asked me to participate, I was so honored that you had reached out to me and you found me. And I'm so glad to be a part of this, to you and the entire Metanoia team. So it's funny that we should be talking about intuition today, a little story about how I came to be so in control of my intuition and following my intuition. I remember waking up on the day of my wedding, crying alone in my room because I knew that I should not go through with it. I knew from the beginning this was not for me and I shouldn't have done it, but I did it anyway. I let fear and my ego take control and I let it take over me and make the decision for me. And I stayed in a very toxic and volatile marriage for 3 years until I finally said enough is enough. And I decided that day when I left that I was no longer going to listen to my ego and outside influences, but I was going to follow my intuition and what I knew was best for me. So that's when I decided to change and really start living my life based on my intuition and what I know is right and what's best for me, and stop listening to the outside voices. So I love this topic of intuition versus ego, and I'm very excited to share that with you. When we first started talking about doing this presentation, I was asked, are you going to use a PowerPoint presentation? You can or you can't, it's up to you. Some presenters are using it, some presenters are not. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll do a slideshow, everything. And then I messaged just a few hours ago and said, actually, I'm not going to. Again, I was letting my intuition guide me, and I decided that I wanted this to be more of an interactive experience, more of a conversation among friends, because that's how I feel that healing happens through relationships. It happens through conversations. And so that's kind of how I want to do it. So I may be asking you some questions if you're open to participating using the raise your hand button option on Zoom. So we'll go ahead and dive right into that now. So does everyone have access to that? And is everyone willing to participate? If you don't feel comfortable, that's fine too, but I would love to see kind of some of the reactions of everyone. So my first question is, raise your hand if you have ever been torn between what you want to do and what you feel like you should do. If you've ever been torn between what you want to do and what you feel like you should do. Okay, I see quite a few hands going up. Yeah. I think that's something that we all kind of come in contact with. All right, here's the next one. Have you ever rushed into a decision before properly feeling it out? Just made a snap decision kind of in the spur of the moment? Yeah, even more hands up this time. And on the back of that, if you have made a snap decision, how many times have you experienced where you've actually second guessed that decision? Later gone back and said, actually, I don't know if I should have made that decision. Yeah. All right. The next one, have you ever made a decision? Raise your hand if you've ever made a decision based on fear or based on other people's experiences. Based on something that happened to someone else, you made a choice for yourself based on out of fear or other people's experiences. Yeah, a lot of hands going up on that one. And the last one is one that I relate to the most. And it's a journey. The whole thing is a process and I'm still learning, but I'm excited to be able to share with you some of the things I've learned along the way. But this last statement, raise your hand if you can relate to it or if you've said this at some point. I knew I should have done this, or I knew I shouldn't have done that. I knew it. After you make the decision, you're like, I knew I should have done it, or I shouldn't have done it, or I knew this was going to happen. I knew he was going to say that. I knew this was going to turn out this way. Yeah, so many hands going up here. This is our intuition, and this is ignoring our intuition. And I think it gets us into quite a few debacles when we do choose to ignore our intuition. Yeah. So what we're going to talk about today then is ego. What is ego? And intuition. What is intuition? And how can we tell the difference? And how can we know it's our intuition talking to us and not our ego? And how can we discern which it is and where it's coming from? So to start with, we're going to talk a little bit about ego. Now, I think there's a common misconception out there, or if you look up the definition of ego, or you hear it in casual conversation, there's this idea that ego means arrogance. You hear someone talking about, oh, he has a huge ego, he's a very arrogant person. They think they know everything, they're full of themselves. This idea of having a big ego is being arrogant. But in our context today, we're going to talk about ego, which is defined as your conscious mind. This is what's happening to you in your mind, in your head, and it's justified by logic. So this is not what we're feeling, this is what we're thinking. So at the beginning, we talked about being caught between your head and your heart. This is your head. The ego is these conscious decisions or conscious thoughts that come to you. Ego is often formed, the majority of the time, is formed by outside experiences, things that have happened to you, programming that comes from outside influences, your family, your culture, your religion, your society, expectations that are placed on you by all of these things, expectations from the family, expectations from culture, expectations from religious leaders. So these are all ingrained into your ego, but they're all from the outside. Ego gives us this idea that there's good and there's bad. There's right and there's wrong. There's a winner, there's a loser. There's success and there's failure. This is all constructs that are presented to us, that are pushed upon us, that are programmed into us from outside experiences. And we take that into ourselves. I'm not saying it's right and I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying this is what happens, right? And so we take all of these experiences and all of these schema and all of this information that's coming from all these different places, and we internalize it, and that becomes our ego. Ego is often comes from a place of fear. And when we talk about ego versus intuition, it's our ego that speaks first, and it's our ego that speaks the loudest. That's the hardest one to drown out. Our intuition is there, but it's a very, very quiet, small, subtle nudge, whereas your ego is loud and it's saying, do this, don't do this. What are people going to think? What are people going to say? You can't do this because ABC, right? This is the ego, all this noise that's hitting us, constantly bombarding us. We see it in social media. We see it in the news. We see it from our family, from our society, from our culture. And this is always hitting us from every direction. Whereas intuition is coming from inside, and it's quiet and it's subtle. But in order to get to the point where we listen to that intuition, we have to block out all of the noise of our ego. So that's not an easy task to do, not at all, but there are ways that we can. Yeah. So before we go on a little bit, I want to talk about my story. I told you a little bit about when I knew I was no longer willing to listen to my ego, and I was ready to walk away from my bad relationship and move forward. Up until that point in my life, I lived my life driven by my ego. I was constantly seeking validation. I was constantly seeking approval from everyone around me, from my family, from my work, from my friends, from relationships, from everywhere but myself. Right? I was seeking validation and approval because that's what I had been conditioned. That's what I had been taught. That's what my trauma has left me to. And I'll talk a little bit about trauma here in a little while. But because of this, I had suppressed my intuition because it often went against what I had been taught and what I had been conditioned to believe was right. So we all receive this programming, like I said, this condition, and we're taught what's right and what's wrong, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, what's good and what's bad. But for me, in my case, a lot of these things that were taught were the exact opposite of my intuition. They were telling me the exact opposite of what I felt was right or what I thought I should do or what I thought was best for me. So it was a constant like push and pull. So what I ended up doing was suppressing my intuition and drowning it out and letting the ego take over because I believed that my intuition was what was wrong, right? Like, where are these voices coming from? I've been told this my entire life. I've been taught this my entire life. So where is this idea coming from that that's not exactly how it is or how it should be? So for me, a lot of this, for example, in my case, a lot of my beliefs that I picked up through my childhood and how I was raised were rooted in racism, rooted in sexism, misogyny, oppression, classism. So I grew up with all of these beliefs because this is how I was raised. This is where I grew up. I grew up in a very, very small, conservative, all-white community. Very, very Christian, very white, very racist, very sexist, very misogynistic. And so all of these things that I heard and all these things that I learned growing up and were just impressed upon me as a child, I took them as this is how it should be, or everyone thinks this way, or this is the way life is. But deep down inside of me, I kept thinking, that can't be right. That doesn't make any sense. And it didn't make any sense to me. But I suppressed that because how can my parents be wrong? How can the people around me be wrong? How can my family be wrong? How can this entire culture that I'm growing up in, this entire community, how can they all be wrong? And they're all telling me one thing, but I feel another way. So it was really, really difficult. And I grew up with this idea that I didn't fit in. I was always the black sheep of the family because my ideas were completely different. And I didn't necessarily subscribe to everything they were telling me, what I was learning, what I was being exposed to. It didn't sit well with me. But when I spoke up about that, when I spoke out and I said, wait, this doesn't make sense, or this doesn't sound right to me, I was criticized. I was ridiculed. I was made fun of. I was teased. So eventually I just stopped speaking up. I stopped talking about it. I just let things continue on and I stopped listening to myself and trusting myself. I'm sure there are some other examples here that you might be able to relate to, like generalizations, that speaking up for yourself was an act of being rebellious. Here's one that I heard a lot, and I know a lot of people have heard: children should be seen and not heard. Boys don't cry. The women's place is in the home. A good wife listens to her husband. A good child respects their parents at all costs, no matter if they're right or wrong. I remember one time specifically when I was a child, I was with my father out in the garden, and one of his partners, somebody he worked with, someone who had a big importance in my father's life, was there. And he was talking to my father, and he said something, and my father responded, and I said, well, actually, I don't remember. I don't think that's right. And I will never forget my father's reaction. Like, how dare you correct me in front of this person? Who do you think you are? Like, for him, it was like the most shameful experience. But what did that teach me as a child? That the truth isn't to be expressed, that it's not safe for me to say what I need to say. It's not, it's not a comfortable position for me to be in to be able to speak up. So, I mean, raise your hand if any of you can relate to any of these types of stories about these idealizations or these thoughts that are ingrained upon us, right? That our emotions are to be held, and we need to be stoic, and we need to be repressed. Yeah, I see quite a few hands going up, a lot of heads nodding and people raising their hands. Yeah. So when we take all of this on, we're actually suppressing our intuition, because we're taking all of this and it's building and building and building and building. And this becomes our ego. This becomes what we are conditioned to believe. So how can we press past that? And that's by listening to our intuition. Now, intuition is a very interesting thing, because if you ask somebody, what is intuition? And I've asked many people, so what is intuition? And nobody has a great definition. Some people say, it's just a feeling. It's a feeling. It's a vibe. It's a gut instinct. Or I just know things. And I struggle with it too. I'm an intuitive medium, and so I pick up on a lot of these vibes. But it's a difficult thing to explain. It's not quite a knowing like a fortune teller, right? But it's more than just a feeling. It is a knowing, but in a subtle way. So intuition is actually defined as the ability to understand something indistinctively without conscious reasoning. So the part that sticks out there is without conscious reasoning. That is the part that makes it intuition and separates intuition from ego. Ego is all about the mind, our conscience, our logic, right? We can logic this out. We can make sense of it, make it make sense. But our intuition, there's no logic, there's no rhyme or reason. It takes the mind out of it. It takes the thoughts out of it. It's all about heart and mind, or heart and body. This is our intuition. Often it can be like a gut feeling. These are things that people have talked about, a gut feeling or a hunch, an inner knowing. Well, we've talked about ego coming from outside. Ego comes from our influences, people around us, our upbringings, everything that's gone on around us. Our intuition comes from within. It's our higher self. It's our higher consciousness, right? And intuition is always looking out for our highest good. Always looking out for our highest good. There's no agenda. Our intuition has no agenda except to make us the best that we can be and have us on the path that we need to be on. There's no agenda. There's no judgment. Our intuition has no judgment. When we talk about ego, we talk about maybe the outcome. There's good, there's bad, there's right, there's wrong. But with intuition, there's no judgment. There's no outcome. There's no attachment outcome. The only outcome that our intuition has is for our highest good. It comes from the heart and it's felt in the body. So this is the biggest distinction I can say between ego and intuition. Everybody has intuition. I know some people are like, I just don't know. I feel like I don't have that intuition. Other people are talking about this sixth sense or this gut feeling, or they just know things, but I don't have it. Everyone has it. It's just that some people's ego has been built up over years and layers and layers and layers that they can't get to the intuition, because it is the quieter voice. It's the whisper in the background, but it's a different kind of sound, because it's always going to give you the same answer. It's not going to change, and it's going to be judgment free. And often it's going to go against what your logic is telling you. Not always. A lot of times your ego and your intuition can match up, and they can have the same outcome or the same result or the same drive. But the thing to be conscious of is the intention behind it, right? Intention. So we're going to talk a little bit about the intention behind that and the difference between intention of ego and intention of intuition in a little while. But the thing to remember is that everyone does have intuition. It just takes time and practice to get to know it. And we'll talk a little bit about that too. So before we move on any further, I want to talk a little bit about trauma, because we cannot talk about ego and intuition without talking about trauma. Trauma is a tricky topic. A lot of people have a lot to say about trauma, and it can be a very deep conversation. There's a lot that goes with it. I'm not going to go very deep into it, and this is all coming from my research and my perspective and my lived experience, so I'm not in any way giving anybody sort of advice or therapy, right? So, but trauma is what is not, a lot of times people think trauma is something that happened to you, but trauma is actually not what happened to you, but it's a result of what happened to you. Trauma can also be a result of what didn't happen to you. So if something catastrophic happened in your life, something bad really happened, the trauma can come as a result of that incident. But trauma can also come from something not happening to you. Your needs not being met as a child can also result in trauma. So if you're a child, maybe you weren't abused as a child, but maybe you had, for example, a father who was absent or who was not emotionally available, who was neglectful, who did not show unconditional love, who didn't know how to love. This can also form trauma. So it's not just what happened to you, it can also be what didn't happen for you, needs not being met. And again, it's the result of those incidences or lack of, and the coping mechanisms that our body developed to help keep us safe. So we have something happen to us. How we respond to that is a coping mechanism. And our body develops this coping mechanism to keep us safe and to help us manage it, right? Because a lot of times when these happen, we're like, oh no, what am I going to do now? So our body takes over. And all of this information is stored in our body, right? So here's an example. Maybe a young girl didn't get love or attention from her father. So this was something that was withheld. A need was withheld. And so this creates trauma. So her coping mechanism, and something that happened as a result, is that she seeks love and approval through from being promiscuous, right? So she is seeking that love. She's seeking that attention that she didn't receive. And this is her coping mechanism. She's trying to go for it. Or maybe she develops this idea that she's not worthy of love, or that she's unlovable because she didn't receive that. So by not receiving this in her childhood, she has a trauma response of then believing that she's not worthy of love. So a lot of times these ideas and these trauma responses and coping mechanisms can feel a lot like intuition, right? It's stored in our body as a memory. And it's stored in there forever until we do the work, until we go through and we do the work to try and heal it, either through therapy, through coaching, through energy healing, through whatever it is that you go through to work it out. But that's why, tell me if this is relatable, but you're having a normal day, everything seems to be fine, and then all of a sudden somebody cuts you off in traffic, or somebody's late, or somebody says something and it triggers you. And you go from 0 to 100 and you get angry or you get upset and you lash out and you're like, why did I react that way? Like, it wasn't even that big of a deal what happened. But it wasn't necessarily that event. It triggered something that could be from 20 years ago. So it's still stored in our body. So we're having a reaction, a triggered response from something that happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, or even 5 years ago. But it's completely unrelatable. It's completely unrelated to the initial thing. But because that feeling is stored in our body, right? When something similar happened, it triggers that idea. That feeling comes back to the surface and says, whoa, something's happening. Our trauma can be so convincing and powerful that it can easily be mistaken for intuition. So if you meet somebody new, for example, a new coworker, and something feels off, their vibe is off, as they say, their vibe. You just don't like their vibe. Something doesn't feel right. So how do you know if this is your intuition telling you, okay, stay away from this person, don't trust this person, this is not a safe situation? Or is it your trauma from a past experience coming up and saying, oh, I've been here before, this reminds me of what happened before? But it's not actually your intuition, it's because something like this has happened before. And our trauma can sound very much like that. So the rule that I like to go with here, and the research shows that anything that has to be justified, convinced, rationalized, or explained, this is trauma, this is not your intuition. If you can quantify it, if you can put some logic to it, then it is no longer your intuition, it's a trauma response or your ego. Because our intuition doesn't make logical sense. It cannot be questioned. It doesn't have to be explained. It doesn't have to be justified. It just is. But if it needs to be justified, if it needs to be rationalized, this is coming from a place of trauma or coming from a place of ego, not your intuition. And it can seem very, very similar. This is something that I still struggle with myself, even through all of this research and all the studies and all of the work that I've done around this topic. It's still something that sometimes I take a step back, I'm like, whoa, okay. Is that my intuition or is that a trauma response, right? Because I think sometimes it's so similar and it's hard to tell. It really, really is. But part of it is stopping instead of reacting, wait, and respond. So that's a whole nother conversation, reacting versus responding, right? But instead of reacting straight away, take a pause, take a breath, and then ask yourself what's going on. So how exactly can we tell the difference between our ego and our intuition? Like I mentioned before, ego, we know, is all about our head. It's all about logic. It can be argued. It can be rationalized. Our intuition is a feeling in our body. So ego is head, intuition is heart, and you can actually feel it in your body, right? So pause, take a breath, and listen to your body. Okay. How does my stomach feel? Do I have an upset stomach? Am I sweating? Am I flushed? Is something happening here all over my body? Am I trembling? Are my hands shaking? Is this physically uncomfortable for me? Is my jaw clenched? Are my shoulders shrugged? Is my body language closed off? Right? These are all physical responses to something that's coming from ego and not intuition. So if you are experiencing something and you're having this closed off and you feel the tension in your body and you feel your chest is tight, maybe your breathing becomes labored. A lot of times people talk about, oh, when you meet the right person, like your heart will flutter and your stomach, you'll get butterflies. Well, actually, that's not necessarily a good thing because that can be your ego responding, right? That can be your body having a physical reaction rather than if it's your intuition, you're going to feel calm, your shoulders are going to be dropped and back, your jaw is going to be relaxed, you're not going to have all this tension behind your ears and in your temporal lobe, right? Your body is going to feel calm, your breath is going to be calm and slow. This is your intuition because it's all about love and your highest good. It's coming from your heart and your body. So my biggest advice is always to listen to your body because your body will tell the entire story. Your energy tells the story. When I work with my clients, I always tell them, okay, so what's going on for my coaching clients, what's happening? And so they'll tell me about 30% of the story of what's going on, but their energy tells the rest of the story. That's it. Because nobody comes straight out and starts telling you, oh, this, and this. They're like, oh, well, And they'll tell you about 30% of the story, but their energy is telling you the rest. So if there's somebody's talking about a certain situation, you can pay attention to their body language as well, because that's going to tell you if they're coming from an authentic place of authenticity, or if they're also coming from a stance of ego, right? So their body language and how they make you feel in your body is going to make a big difference. Yeah. You can actually, raise your hand again. See, I'm going to get you guys involved. Have you ever had this physical reaction to a person or a situation? It doesn't just have to be a person, but a situation. Maybe you're thinking about getting a new job and you go for the job interview and you're talking in the job interview and you're thinking, okay, this is a really nice salary. This is really good benefits. I think this will be really great. But there's something in your body that's just like, oh, no, like it's just your body feels tight. You're breathing, your chest feels heavy. You feel like sick to your stomach. Logically, you know, okay, this would be a great move for my career. This would be really good on my CV. This is a really nice salary. But there's something in you that's just like, it doesn't feel right. Yeah, I see some people's hands going up. It's very relatable. So again, this is your ego versus your intuition. If you feel calm, if you feel relaxed, if it feels good, this is the difference between knowing, thinking, and feeling, right? And I know it's so hard in the world that we live in because we all have bills to pay. Let's be honest. We all have bills to pay. We all have, you know, some of us have families to take care of us. We have futures to think about. So it's really easy to get caught up in the ego. It's really easy to get caught up in the logic of it. But this is something I want to think about. If we live our life from a place of ego, maybe we'll get ahead in our career. In the long run, what is that going to do for us? What is it going to do for your spiritual well-being? What is it going to do for your mental well-being? Because if you have a job that's making money, but you come home tired, you come home stressed out, and you're not able to be the best person you want to be or the person you want to be for your family or for yourself, in the end, is it worth it? If we're making choices based on ego to please our family, our parents want us to do this, or we have pressure from society to do this, or look this way, or act this way, is it what's going to make us feel good in the long run? And I think that a lot of people struggle with this. I know that I've struggled with this personally because we want to be, it's human nature to want to be liked. And we are taught and raised in certain ways that this is how it should be. This is what we should be like. And we don't want to disappoint people, right? We don't want to disappoint people. We don't want to let people down. And on some level, I think most people do actually care about what others think about them, even if we don't want to admit it. But on some level, because of the programming that we've received, we really do. And so to be able to separate from this and do what's best for us, I think is often really difficult, especially when we take into consideration that a lot of times following our intuition and doing what's best for us involves setting boundaries. And setting boundaries is hard. It's difficult, especially boundaries with family, work boundaries, boundaries with our partners, because we don't want to push people out of our life. And sometimes we can feel like it's selfish. It's coming from a place of being selfish. If I put a boundary in place, I'm being selfish. If I choose not to take this job that's going to have a higher salary that's going to help my family in the long run, it's me being selfish. But in fact, that's self-preservation, that's self-care, because in the end, following your intuition is going to get you so much further, because again, it's about the intention behind it. You're not choosing to walk away from this career because you're lazy or because you want to, upset your family or anything like that. You're doing it because it doesn't feel right for you. And you know that something better is going to come along that's going to be more aligned with you. So a lot of times when we talk about following our intuition and listening to our intuition, it feels almost counterintuitive, and it can feel like a little selfish, because the norms and the pressure that we have, and again, all of these layers of expectations that we've been built all around us are pushing down on us, telling us, do this, do this, do this. But inside we're like, I can't anymore. I can't take it anymore. And that's how I got to the point where I was like, I can't do this anymore. I stayed in my unhealthy, toxic relationship for 3 years. Why? Because of fear. because I was afraid of what people were going to say. I was afraid of who I was going to disappoint. I was afraid of how many people were going to say, I told you so. But most of all, I was afraid to face myself because I knew all along that I shouldn't have gone through with it. And if I left and I walked away, it's proving that I was wrong all along. So by sticking with it and being like, no, I can make this work. And also, I don't know if you're into astrology, but I'm Sagittarius and I'm very strong-headed and I'm very determined and I am all about making things happen. Like, I'm not just going to walk away. I'm going to make this happen no matter what. So it was like, I can do this. I can do this. And it was a fear of failure as well, because if I did leave my relationship, then I failed. I failed as a wife. I failed in this relationship, and that made me less than, right? So this was my ego, and this was what was keeping me there for so long. But when I finally had enough, it was so freeing and it was so liberating. And I was actually shocked at how supportive everyone was, because I thought I was going to get a lot of, oh, I told you to, you shouldn't have married him anyway. Like, you know, I was expecting a lot of this, oh, you failed, you couldn't make it work, you know, the judgment, but people were so supportive. And so that was a big lesson for me too, that following your intuition can inspire people. And this is why I love what I do, because I like inspiring people. And I've been asked, like, how can you tell your story? How can you talk about, you know, your childhood? How can you talk about your traumas, your relationship, all of these kind of things? Like, don't you feel shy about it? Don't you feel embarrassed? And I said, if I tell my story, if I can inspire one person, then that's enough. That's enough for me to want to tell my story and share my journey, because I think as humans, we all are connected together and we can all learn from each other. So if by me sharing my story about my failed marriage, which turned out to be one of the biggest blessings in my life, but if I can share my story about that, inspire someone else to listen to their intuition, or to not be afraid to walk away, not necessarily from a relationship, but from a job, from an unhealthy relationship, an unhealthy friendship, if I can inspire someone else to do that, then it was worth it in the end, right? So that's a little bit about how I got to this point where I was ready to walk away and just listen to myself and trust myself. You know, at the beginning of the year, we always do the whole thing with, okay, new year, new me, which I don't really subscribe to. My whole thing is new year, same me, new goals, new aspirations. But I do usually choose a word, like a word. What is my word of the year? And my word of 2023 is trust. And so when I started talking about this, and when I was reached out to do this topic and to talk about intuition, I said that is absolutely perfect, because intuition is all about trust. It's all about trusting yourself, which has been the biggest lesson that I've learned in my life, is to trust myself, right? Put all of that other stuff aside and really, really trust myself. Trust God, trust the universe, that everything's going to work out. And again, to get to that point, though, you have to push past the ego and push past everyone's expectations and what everyone else has set out there for you, and the expectations, and be okay with it. That's the other part that is hardest, is because when you do start to listen to your intuition and you start living this authentic life and you start living your life for yourself, there are people that it's going to upset. There are people who are going to walk out of your life. There are people who are going to say, who do you think you are? There are people who are going to question you and who are going to say, oh, you started to heal, now you think you're better than everyone. I've heard this, I don't know how many times. Oh, you think you're better than everyone else now because you're X, Y, and Z. But remember, that has nothing to do with you. That's them coming from their unhealed spaces, and that's their projection onto you. So it's not easy. Healing is not an easy journey. Learning to trust yourself and trust your intuition is not an easy. It's not, I mean, I could sit here and say, yeah, trust yourself, liberate yourself, have this beautiful, amazing life, following your heart, following your dreams, and all this amazing toxic positivity, but I'd be lying. And I don't do that. Like, this is real. This is who I am. This is my experience. And this is what's happened to me. And I do feel like a lot of people who have been on this journey have experienced the same thing. That when you start to heal, when you start to raise your vibration, when you start to grow as a person, other people are intimidated by it. It's like that saying that says, I am not intimidating, you are intimidated, right? So other people start feeling this, and other people can start falling away and they disappear, and that's okay. It's hard not to take it personally, but you have to understand people can only experience you at the level they are at. So some people will fall out of your life and then they'll pop back up and be like, oh, okay, I see where you're coming from. I see your intentions. That's great. Some people don't, but it's just not part of their journey, and it's not part of your journey. Everyone comes into your life and everyone plays a role in your life. Some people are there for a lifetime. Some people are there for a short time, and they're all lessons. And I'm grateful for all of those people. Some of the people that I've learned the most from are people who have been in my life for the shortest amount of time. So it's just something to remember, that as you start to follow your intuition and as you start to live your authentic self or your authentic life, that this can happen, and it is hard, and it can be a lonely journey. So I think that things like this conference, where it brings people together and people are allowed to share their stories in a safe space, this is what it's all about. Because these are the people, you all are the people who want to make a difference. You all are the people who are showing up, who want to change, who are on this journey. And I'm honored to be on this journey with you. But if you can be here and then you can turn around and inspire even one person, look at the ripple effect we can have on this world, right? We can all use a little bit more healing. We could all use a little bit more trust. And so just being here, I really thank you for all being here and showing up and being on this journey with me. So I got off topic a little bit, but that's typical for me because that's just how I am. I become inspired sometimes. And so when things come up and I come inspired, I just go with it. So that's what happens. I receive messages and I'm like, okay, just go for it. So that's what I do. But getting back to this topic, here are some other questions to ask yourself besides listening to your body and saying, are my shoulders up tight? Is my jaw clenched? So listening to your body, but some other questions you can ask yourself to decipher, is this ego or is this intuition? The first question is, and this one's probably the toughest one for me, is, am I attached to the outcome? Am I attached to the outcome? Am I going to be okay with something happening one way or another? Am I going to be okay with what other people think? Am I attached to the outcome? Because if you're attached to the outcome, meaning you're expecting something to happen, this is ego. Because intuition comes with no expectations. No expectations and no judgment. So being free from that attachment to the outcome, that's intuition. And along with that, am I worried about how others will react? Is this something that I'm thinking about? Before I make a decision, am I even thinking about other people, or am I thinking only about how I feel? Because if I stop, obviously, if we have families, we're going to stop and think about how is this going to affect other people, because we're humans and that's what we do. But are we making the decision based on that? Are we making the decision based on how other people are going to feel and not necessarily how it affects them? Also, am I making this decision for me, or am I making this decision for someone else? Is this a decision that I want to make, or is this something that my parents want me to do? Is this something my partner wants me to do? Is this something my employer wants me to do? I was presented with an opportunity. So my background is in education. I worked as a teacher for a long time. I worked as an administrator for a long time, as a teacher, coach, and other parts in administration, but I was offered a position once, a promotion. And my principal at the school really wanted me to take this promotion. She said, Jen, why wouldn't you take the promotion? It's a pay increase. It'll be really good for your CV. It'll be really good for the school. You're perfect for the position. And I stopped and I thought, okay, but I actually don't want that job. I don't want to. I like what I'm doing. I'm happy with what I'm doing. So why am I going to make this decision for someone else because she wants me to take the job, or because someone else wants me to take the job? If I'm happy with what I'm doing, then why am I going to make this decision? So I had to take a step back and ask myself that question. Here's another one. This is a big one, okay? So I want you to think about the person that you love the person you respect, the person you most love in this world, or the person who's dearest to you, or the person you most respect in this world? Would you give them the same advice? When you're thinking about making a decision, would you advise them to do the same thing? Because oftentimes we're much harder on ourselves than we are on other people, right? We give other people so much lenience and we're like, oh, are you crazy? Why are you doing that? And relationships come to mind for me because I get asked relationship advice all the time. I'm like, I'm not the person asked for relationship advice, but right, like we're so hard on other people. Like, I can't believe you're dating that person. I can't believe you're putting up with that. Or even jobs, like, why would you put up with the boss who told you to do that? Tell her that's not your job. You didn't sign up for that. It's not in my job description. It's easier for us to tell other people that because we care about them and their well-being. But then when it comes to us, is that the same advice we would take for ourselves? So that's another thing to ask when you're looking at coming from ego or coming from intuition. Because if it's not advice that you would give somebody else, then it's not advice you should be taking for your own self. And then another bit on intuition. A lot of times when we're quiet, when we're driving, when we're at night and we can't sleep and we're laying there and our head is racing a million miles an hour and these random thoughts pop into our mind, jot them down. Jot down the thoughts that you're having. And then later ask yourself, where is that coming from? Where is that coming from? Is that coming from inside me or is that coming from outside me? Is this chaos and noise that I'm picked up from somewhere else? Or is this something that I truly believe? Is this in line with my values? All right, so I just have a couple of examples here of what intuition versus ego. So I mentioned before that it's all about intention. Sometimes we can have the same result, but it's about the intention behind it. So one example, I want to start my own company, which I did want to. And so this is the question though. I want to start my own company because I want to help people. I genuinely want to help people. Or I want to start my own company because I want to make a lot of money. So what is the intention behind it? I'm not saying making a lot of money is bad. You can do a lot of good with a lot of money. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the energy of money. But what is your primary intention, right? So one is coming from a place of intuition. One is coming from a place of ego. Intuition says, I've been going so fast and I've been so busy. I need to rest. Intuition says, I need to rest. I need to take time to rest. I need to let my body catch up with whatever's going on. Ego says, don't be lazy. If I stop and I take time to rest, I'm being lazy. I'm not being productive. I need to be productive. I need to not waste my time by, sitting on the beach for an hour. I need to be productive. If I'm not doing something, I'm not being productive. But remember, rest is productive. Rest is absolutely productive. So intuition says, I need rest. Ego says, stop being lazy. Along the same lines, intuition says, I need a massage. I need acupuncture. I need to go to the chiropractor. I need to go to a yoga class. I need to do all of this stuff for my self-care. Ego says, that's being very frivolous with your money. You don't have the money to do that. That's expensive. You're going to pay for a massage. You're going to pay for acupuncture. You're going to pay for a yoga class. Where are you getting all of this money? This is coming from a place of scarcity mindset, and this is ego, right? But we know that if it's going to make us feel better, if it's going to help with our mental, with our physical, with our spiritual well-being, then it's the intention behind it. Yes, you're still spending money, but it's the intention behind spending the money and what you're doing it for. And if it's for your well-being, this is coming from intention, or this is coming from intuition and not ego. Again, the same example, another example. I want to volunteer to help people. I want to go to the hospital. I want to go to the Red Crescent. I want to go volunteer at an orphanage. I want to help people. Is that coming from a true place of authenticity because you want to help people? Ego says, I want to help people. I want to volunteer because it looks good on my CV. It looks good on my LinkedIn if I volunteered with these people. So yes, it's still volunteering. And this is what I'm talking about intention, because you might have this opportunity come up. Hey, let me reach out to you. I want to ask you to be a part of this volunteer project. We're doing this amazing thing. Would you like to be a part of it? If your initial reaction is, wow, what can I get out of that? How can that further my career? How can, what is this going to make me look like in the eyes of other people? That's ego. The answer is yes, but it's ego. The answer is still yes with your intuition, but is it intentional? Is it authentic? Are you doing it because you genuinely want to be a part of the project? Do your values align with what this project is? Maybe it's a project you actually don't care about. It's not like a big deal to you. So why are you saying yes then? If it's not something that is aligned with your values, why are you saying yes? So that's something to think again about when it comes to intention. Another example, you have an opportunity to go into a relationship. Now, this one is very deeply personal if you've been here from the beginning and heard my story. So at this stage in my life, I want to share my life with someone. I want someone to share my happiness with. I want someone who can add value to my life and I can add value to their life. This is intuition. This is intention, right? So if I meet someone and this happens, great. Ego comes from a viewpoint of, I don't want to be alone. I don't want to be alone. And this is fear-based, right? And so it's all about intention. The answer still might be the same, but what's the intention? Because the intention will tell you whether it's coming from a place of intuition or if it's coming from a place of ego. So all of this being said, the question then is, how can I develop my intuition, right? So you're like, yeah, this is all really great, Jen, and this is all really good ideas. And I'm like, yeah, I get it, like nodding my head, raising my hand, but okay, so what do I do with it now? I know I should be trusting myself. I know I should be listening to my intuition, but how? How do I get to that point when the ego is there and it's so loud and it's blaring in my ear? And I have, for me, 38 years of all of this chaos, of all of this pressure and all of this society telling me how I should be and what I should do. How do I drown all of that out and listen to my intuition? There are a couple things. The first one I would say is connect to your higher self. So before you can start to hear your intuition, you have to connect with yourself. So there are different ways to do this. For me, I meditate daily. I do yoga. I practice yoga. I teach yoga. I love nature. I don't know, I'm here in Dubai and it's been raining for the last 3 days, so it's not been great for me because I like the sunshine, not the rain. I'm probably the only one in all the UAE who's not happy about the rain. But because I can't be out in nature, right? I can't be on the beach. I can't go for a walk in the grass. But connecting with nature, meditating, mindful movement, breath work, journaling, all of these things that are helping you connect, and not even necessarily to your intuition, just to yourself. Taking a moment to be with yourself, to silence the noise from outside. It's so funny, when I first started meditating, my teacher, I had a really terrible meditation teacher, by the way. My first experience with yoga was actually awful in meditation, but who just kept saying, quiet your mind, empty your mind, don't think about anything. Yeah, okay, sure. Absolutely not. That did not work for me, right? It was more about just being with the present, right? Just allowing what's coming in to come in and then let it go, and being aware of my thoughts, being aware of what was coming into my mind. So just connecting with myself and being aware when I'm sitting there and I'm quiet and something pops into my head, be like, oh, where did that come from? And then letting it go. So awareness is the first thing, like connecting with yourself and then becoming aware of your thoughts. And then questioning, where are these thoughts coming from? The next thing I would say is live a life that is in alignment with your values. Because when you're living a life that is in alignment with your values, it's going to come much more naturally because you're not going against the flow. If you truly believe something and you believe in a life in one way, but you're living it in another way, this is causing conflict within yourself. So living in alignment with your values is going to help you connect to yourself even more. And practice. It's the small things that you normally wouldn't pay attention to, right? Like thoughts, random thoughts that come in for me when I'm driving, and like random things come into my head and I'm like, where did that come from? Was that like an intuitive hit? Was this a download for me? Or was this just like anger that came from nowhere? And if it came from nowhere, it didn't actually come from nowhere, did it? It came from somewhere, but it's probably from the ego. So what is that attached to? But just practicing listening to yourself. Here's an example. Think about this. You're at home, chilling, it's Friday night, you're listening to an amazing speaker, online on a Zoom conference call, and all of a sudden your doorbell rings. How do you respond? How do you react? What happens? Do you feel a little panic? Do you feel a little jolt, like, oh, who's that? Why would they be at my door at this time? What's going on? What's happening? Is it like a worst case scenario, like, oh my gosh, something's happening, something bad has happened? Or is it a fear of, oh no, they're coming for me? Or is it a curiosity? I wonder who that could be. But I'm not bothered by it because I'm in the middle of something. Or I'm curious, I'm going to go see who it is, but I'm not attached to the outcome. I'm not worried about who it is. I'm curious about who it is, but I'm not worried about it. So just pay attention to your body. Pay attention to your thought processes. Respond rather than react. React is immediately what happens, and react is almost always ego. Almost always. Our first reaction, our knee jerk, is almost always our ego. But if we stop, we take a breath, we connect with ourselves, and we pause, and then we respond. Once we have a little more information, once we've calmed our breathing, once we've connected with ourselves, that's when we give intuition a chance to thrive, right? So respond rather than react. You can also test some of your hunches. Like, this is kind of the long-term game, but if you have someone at work, for example, someone new who just comes to your company and you meet them for the first time and you have a feeling like, I don't know about that person, write down your hunches and then like play it out and see what happens and see if you were right? Or see if you were wrong. And then if you were wrong, maybe go back and say, I wonder if that person reminded me of someone else, and maybe that's why. So you can play the long game on this just to test your hunches and see where they're coming from. The most important one is to let go of the resistance and just trust yourself. Let go of all of the resistance, which comes from the ego. And did you hear that? That's somebody at my door. Oh my gosh, how funny is that? Yeah, wow, that's insane. Okay, universe, wow. Back on train of thought. Let go of the resistance. Allow it to happen. Allow it to come up and trust yourself. Trust the process. Trust that you know what's best for you without allowing all of the outside influences. Journaling is a really good tool for this, because a lot of times when we do feel that guilt or we feel pressure from outside, if we write it down and kind of figure out where is this actually coming from, then we can separate what's us and what's them. But trust yourself, trust yourself so much, because everyone has they're going to go away eventually. Everyone has the ability to connect with their intuition and to really trust and listen to that. It just takes time, it takes practice, and it takes trust. So, yeah, that's what I have for you. We have about 10 minutes, so I'll open it up as a Q&A. If anybody has any questions, you can raise your hand, you can pop it in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself. It's pretty chill. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking your time to be here.
Thank you very much, Jen. I'm just going to say, if you'd like to attend the door, we're more than happy to wait for a few minutes.
No, it's fine. They'll come back. Okay. I'm not expecting anyone, so it's probably like, water delivery or something.
All right. Thank you very much for the session, Jen. And just like you mentioned about when the doorbell rang and then you mentioned the universe, right? I am. I think my personal journey, sitting here and listening to your session on intuition, has a lot to do with perhaps the universe guiding me towards the most important aspect of my life, which is that balance between intuition and ego. So I'm absolutely grateful to you. I think we do have certain questions, Regina, if you'd like to
Okay,
ask.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Jen.
Hi, I'm here.
Okay. I have a question here from what you said just earlier. If I have an intention to serve people, I have a plan in mind, but I understand that I have to make enough financial stability before I get into that plan. And then I have to do something that will bring me that financial stability, which will bring stress to my mind and body. Then how do I do about that?
That's a great question, because as I mentioned, we all have bills to pay. We all have, things that we have to take care of, and we have the right intention behind it. But again, we still need monetary means for it, right? So my suggestion for this is, if you keep moving in this positive direction and trust that it's going to come up. I'm not saying like just, people talk about manifestation, just make it happen. In reality, it doesn't always work that way. But I truly believe if your intention is there and you create a plan and an action plan, and each of your the steps in your action plan are aligned with what your true intention is, then just take it one bit at a time. Remember, it doesn't have to be all at once. It doesn't have to be so fast. But as long as you have your plan and you're taking inspired action steps along with it, right? So just continue to take the steps, have the plan, and trust each step of the way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Regina, I hope.
Okay.
Would you like to unmute? I hope you've gotten your answer. If you'd like to unmute, please try now, please.
Yeah. Sorry, I just got a message from the person at the door. So if I could just pause for 1 second and let me go check that really quickly.
Sure
Sorry.
thing. Please take your time. No problem. I think, Regina, you're saying something? We've got you stuck at the moment. Meanwhile, everyone, to all our participants. Yes, go ahead, please. I can hear you now. Can you go ahead once again, please?
I just got stuck actually. I got my answer. I just wanted to thank her and just move on to the next person.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Regina. Just wanted to tell all our participants here, until Jen is going to join us back, we've got a special feedback session at the end, and it's going to be your time to share your insights. It's been a long journey. It's been a journey of 7 days with 14 different speakers. So please use this opportunity to share your feedbacks, to let us know what helped you, what you've gained, and how you'd like to take this life forward. So we're eagerly awaiting to listen to you. So please be ready to jump in and unmute yourself after Jen arrives and we are done thanking her, please. Meanwhile, please, if you have any questions, drop it in. If you have any questions for Jen, drop them in. I'd love to listen to your own stories of intuition, if there are any. Have you ever been stuck in a conflict between intuition and ego? How did you help and empower yourself with intuition? Jen, are you back?
I'm back. Yeah, sorry. It was it was the guy coming to collect the gas bill, and they're not going to go away, right? They need their money. So sorry about that, but thank you.
No problem. Regina just informed that she's gotten her answer, and she's very grateful.
Okay, good. I'm so glad. Thank you. Any other questions, or anybody else want to talk about their story? I love to hold space and listen to other people's stories as well, because I become just as inspired by other people.
Absolutely.
Was there any other questions?
Go on being me. You can ask your question. Please do tell us your name as well. We'd love to know it.
Hello, my name is Jensred, and I have a question to you, because in my studies now, I'm doing my PG now, and I have a friend, but I didn't feel like being closer to her. I always go to the college and return with her, but I didn't feel like being so close or opening up, or just I don't know why that actually. Is there my ego or something? Can you say?
So if I understand correctly, there's somebody that you go to school with, but you don't feel like you want to get very close to her.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I would encourage you to ask yourself, because you're asking me why, but that's a question you have to ask yourself. How does your body feel when you're around her? So do you feel calm when you're around her? Do you feel irritated, like just annoyed? Does she remind you of somebody else? Or is your body just saying, no, this is not like somebody that I want to spend time with? If you don't mind sharing, I'd love to hear your answer. Oh, you can't unmute.
Okay.
Okay.
I just feel like I don't know what. Ma'am, what did you ask? Can you repeat?
Yeah, I just asked, how do you feel when you're around her? Do you feel nervous? Do you feel anxious? Does your body feel relaxed? Do you feel irritated? And maybe does she remind you of somebody else that you know?
No, it's like sometimes I feel like irritating because always I'm not such a talkable person maybe, but always she's saying her own things without hearing. That's why maybe I think. But I just want to be close to her, but my mind is not allowing. I think.
I think that I think that you should listen to your body, listen to your intuition. What I'm hearing is that she more likes to talk about herself, and she speaks only to be heard and not to listen to other people. And that's not a true friendship. That's not a true relationship. It seems a bit one-sided. And maybe that's what you're picking up on, are the vibes from that way. So I would say that having boundaries is important. If you want to be friends with her and you want to have her in your life, that's okay, but set up those boundaries so that it is a healthy relationship. Because I think there are some people that we can be friends with that we truly love and we want them to be in our life, but we can't allow them to bring in negative energy. Or like, have you ever been around somebody that after you're done spending time with them, you just feel like exhausted? Because these are people I like to call energy vampires, right? They suck all of our energy away. And sometimes it's because they're always talking about negative things. Sometimes they just are only gossiping about other people, but that brings down our energy. And so by setting a boundary, look, I would love to be friends with you. We can hang out. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. Or when she changes the topic, you can always bring it back to something else. But setting those boundaries is a way to keep people. When we set boundaries, it's not because we want people out of our life. It's because we want people to stay in our life. So setting boundaries allows people to stay in our life in a healthy way. So I would say evaluate what you are comfortable with her, what you're not comfortable with, and then set your boundaries based on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome.
I think that ties on to one of the questions that one of our participants asked. How do you set boundaries with your loved ones?
That's one of the hardest things that we can do. Like I said, when we start this healing journey and we start to really listen to our intuition and trust ourselves and do what's best for us, it does mean that a lot of people are going to be upset and a lot of people are not going to take it well. And we come at it from two different directions. One direction is that they're our loved ones. We don't want to upset them. And maybe we have cultural norms that we can't be disrespectful and we can't just cut people out of our life. But what we can do is redirect conversations. Like I said, if somebody starts gossiping or somebody starts talking unhealthy, we can redirect it. If somebody shows up at your house in the middle of the night, you can say, I understand that you have something urgent to talk to me about. In the future, please make sure you call before you come over. So it's just putting those small steps in bit by bit by bit. Because if you come full force, if you've never had any boundaries, and you come in all this of a sudden and say X, Y, and Z, boom, 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 it's going to be a huge, huge change for the people around you. But if you start to do it slowly and implement your boundaries as they come up, instead of just saying, okay, this is a completely new me, I need to have this boundary, I need to have this boundary. Maybe when something does come up, like you're talking to your sister, for example, and she's just being very negative, say, I really don't have the emotional capacity to have this conversation right now. Do you mind if we talk about this maybe after I've had some rest? That's setting a boundary, but it's a soft boundary. It's a calm and it's polite and it's respectful so that it's received in a better way. There are hard boundaries, there are soft boundaries, and you get to choose where you want to have those. One of the most important things about boundaries that I always tell people is people who are the most resistant to your boundaries, people who react the most negatively to your boundaries are the people who benefited from you not having any to begin with. Right? So of course they're going to have a hard time with those boundaries that you set. But there are two types of people. There are the people who are going to say, oh, okay, I didn't even think about calling before I came over. Sure, I'll happily call next time before I come over. Then there are the people who are going to be like, what? How can you tell me that this is, you're my sister? I can come whenever I want. And that's okay too. But those are the harder ones to deal with. And maybe they get angry, maybe they get upset and they have a big fight and they storm off, but eventually they're going to come back, or they're not. Most of the time they will, though. If they truly love you and it's your family and it is a healthy relationship, then they might get upset, but they might come back also. Consistency is important, though, because if you say, please don't come over unless you call, and then they do it again and again and again, and you're not consistent, that's not going to keep the boundary in place. But I would say start small and handle them as they come up. Instead of setting a whole list of boundaries, like sending it out in your family group chat, wait until things come up slowly by slowly and handle them as they come along.
Sure. Thank you very much. I think it's all about a sense of diplomacy. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Let's hear you, Chipper. Please go ahead. Chippy, would you like to ask your question right now? Okay. Just, host, can you make sure she has the unmute option?
Oh, she can't unmute yet, it says there. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Hello, ma'am. Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
Actually, hi. I'm a healer and active healer, and also a mind healer. And I have a clear intention that I want to heal the suffering people. But other than the healing time, sometimes I feel something that while on my journey to myself, I felt that that is ego. So now I'm confused. That is ego or something other than that. If that ego means, how can I rid off from that ego?
Okay, this is a great question. I think a lot of people who are healers, who are people that are teachers, are on this journey, and they experience this, and I experience it in my life a lot, is what is I know what my true intention is, but how can I make this work, right? And how do I get the ego out of it? And I think there's a lot that comes in. I was actually just talking to my best friend about this today, about imposter syndrome. Like, who am I to try and help someone else? I think the important thing, though, is intention. If your intention is, and remember, like, we can't heal people. We can hold space and we can provide tools and we can provide a comfortable environment for them to heal themselves, right? But people have to be ready and people have to be willing. So if we can hold that space for them, right? So that's the intention. I think if the intention is to go in, I want to heal everybody in the world and I want to make everybody better, maybe that's coming from a place of ego, because it's saying, like, I want to do it. That's a big I in the sentence, right? I want to heal you. But if you're saying, I want to hold space for people to heal themselves and come from the perspective of other people needing to do the work themselves, but we're just the tool. We're the vessel for them to do it. So if we come at it from that intention behind there, that's definitely from a more authentic place. And that intention is more pure and more of a truth. Less ego in that way. So maybe just reframe it from I want to heal people to I want to provide a safe space for people to heal. And that can help take the ego out of it.
Thank you very much, Chippy. I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for your question. Jen, I think, guys, if we have any more questions, please do raise your hand. I just wanted to ask you one thing. You mentioned about fear, you mentioned about trust. So I'm wondering if trust is the antidote to fear. And I think on the path of authenticity, when we're trying to pursue our intention, often at times we are we are faced with this conflict between fear and trust. So would you say that trust is the antidote to fear?
Yeah, I mean, fear comes from a lot of different places. Again, fear can come from trauma, fear comes from ego, but trust, if we truly, truly know ourselves and truly trust our intuition and we trust ourselves, then we have nothing to fear. Because if we look at things from a detached perspective, then we know that there's no right or wrong, there's no good or bad, there only is, right? So even when we talk about mistakes or we talk about doing something wrong, we can look at it from a space of a learning experience. These are just data points along the way. So when we detach ourselves from the outcome of any situation, so I like to say it as I am an observer of my life, right? I am an observer. I'm an objective observer. So I don't have any agenda and I don't have any attachment to the outcome of the situation. I'm just watching life unfold in front of me and being present in the moment and trusting that everything is going to work out for my highest good. So if I trust that everything's going to work out for my highest good and I'm not attached to the outcome of anything, I have nothing to fear. So to answer your question in a short, concise way, yes.
Absolutely beautiful. We have one more question if you have the time today. Would you like to take that?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Okay. How to detach emotionally from specific cases practically and gradually?
Okay, how do you detach from specific places?
Specific cases, I think we're talking about a journey of healing wherein they want to detach practically and very gradually from specific emotional attachments.
Okay, right. So the first thing I would say is go back to and figure out, why are you attached to it? Is this something that is from your past? Is this something that's happening now? Is this something that's been ingrained into you? Are you attached to it because you've been told that this is something you should be attached to? So get down to the why am I attached to this? And that can take time. So the thing is, in the question, it talks about practical and gradual. And I think those are two really, really good, important words, because healing is a journey. Like nobody, in my opinion, nobody is ever completely healed. There are always things that are going to come up. And it's like, you think that you've passed this one trauma or one situation in one case. We're like, oh, okay, I got to the bottom of that. I worked through it. I'm good. Like I got it. I'm over my issue with fear. I'm over my mommy issues, whatever it is. And then you're like, cool, this is awesome. And then out of nowhere, it hits you and you're like, oh, again, I thought I was over this, right? So it's continuous. It's a continuous roller coaster, and it's a journey, and it's always going. So gradual is just bit by bit, and it takes time. But I think it's about getting to the root of why you have that attachment. And once you get to the root of it, there's one tool I like to use where you ask, like, you picture your worst case scenario. If I completely let go of this, what's the worst that's going to happen? And then once you picture whatever the worst case scenario is, take a step back and say, okay, why is that the worst case scenario? Why would it be bad if that happened? And so if you just keep going back by why and why, you'll get to the root cause of that, and you'll get to the point where it's like, okay, actually, that's not so bad. Okay, actually, that's not so bad. Okay, that will be fine. Like, I trust that everything's going to work out. So then slowly, eventually, you let it go. But it is gradual, and it's a process, and it goes layer by layer by layer. But starting with the why do I feel attached to this is the first step. So I hope that answers your question.
I hope so too. Thank you very much, Jen. I just wanted to bring it to a conclusion, but I want to mention something. My mentor had, I remember reading one of her quotes wherein she says, when you're able to very reflectively talk about your traumas and very confidently, with lots of courage, when you're able to talk about your traumas, that means you've completely healed it. You've completely, moved over it to a large extent. And I'm curious, you mentioned about your own traumas, you mentioned about your own pain. What was the biggest tool that empowered you to get over that healing, that trauma and that pain?
Oh, that's a great question. The first time, like, often we go back and we're like, okay, I ask a lot of my clients, I want you to go back to your earliest memory when you remember being happy, when you remember feeling joy. And for me, I was about 5 years old. So from that time on, I really started, and I experienced trauma before that, I just don't remember it. But there have been so many things that have just compiled. And for me, I think it was getting to a point that I was like, I hit a rock bottom. And when I hit that rock bottom, I was like, okay, like, what am I actually doing here? What am I actually doing with my life? And is this really how I'm meant to live? For me, that moment happened when my grandmother passed away. I was very close with my grandmother, despite some issues there. But she passed away right before I moved to Dubai, actually, which was a little over 10 years ago. And I remember after I moved to Dubai, I was at home by myself, and I was just kind of questioning everything, questioning my life. What am I doing? What's happening? And I heard her voice. And I heard her come to me, and I received a message from her, and she was like, what are you doing? It's time to wake up. And so for me, that was my moment. It was like my rock bottom. It was like, I was so confused. I had no idea what was going on in my life. I didn't know if I was going up, if I was going down. I was running away. I was very much running away from my life back home in the States and all of the trauma there and everything I didn't want to deal with. I didn't want to deal with anything. So what did I do? I got on a plane and I moved halfway around the world to Dubai, right? Because that's what people do. They just run and run and run and run and run from their trauma. But eventually it caught up with me and I couldn't run anymore. And so I had to face it. And so it took me a really long time before I could talk about any of this, any of my trauma, any of my childhood experiences, any of this stuff without crying, without getting upset, without feeling shame, without feeling a burden. But it just took me telling my story to one person, and then to one more person, and then one more person. And then I got comfortable with it. And it was doing the work as well. It's not just telling my story, but it's doing the work and actually getting to the root of it and healing myself and loving my little inner child who didn't have that growing up. And so providing for myself what I didn't receive. But I had to get to the point where I was like, everything caught up with me. And it was almost like a do or die situation. Okay, you can live the rest of your life in this state, or you can do something about it.
Amazing. I know I took you for a little longer than we had actually scheduled, and that is primarily because how important the work you do is. I remember reading a couple of articles that mentioned about in a world of AI, in a world of artificial intelligence taking over, it is our human innate ability to tap into our inner voice that is going to give us a constant edge. And that's why I think the work you do is so important. And I can't thank you enough, not only for the work you do, but for your time and your generous sharing of your insights with us here today. It is an absolute pleasure. And if we had more time, I would go on and on with questions. I'm curious to know your relationship with beach. I realize a lot of your pictures have a beach in the background. And I think that is because you have a special relationship with the beach. And I'm really curious to know that. But I'd love to have a conversation with you sometime later to know more about what you do and the depth insights that you share.
I would absolutely love that. And actually, just to answer your question, I was on the beach when I had that realization moment that I needed to figure out what was going on. So that's where it happened. And so that is my special connection to the beach. Yeah. But thank you so much thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this. I'm really honored and I'm so glad. And I want to thank all of the participants for sharing this time and space and showing up for yourselves, not showing up for me, you're showing up for yourselves. When we do things like this, we're doing it for ourselves. So really, thank you. I'm really honored to be a part of this. Thank you. And I hope if anybody has any other questions, feel free to reach out to me anytime.
The pleasure is ours. As a token of our gratitude and love, we've got a tiny little humble certificate from our part, which our host is just going to share. This is for you, Jen. Thank you for your generosity and your kindness.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We hope to continue collaborating with you. Thank you very much, Jen, and all the best for everything you do. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
You too, Jen. Thank you very much. And thank you to all our participants here today who showed so much engagement, so much sincerity towards your own process of growth. We're absolutely grateful. Now it is time, as mentioned, to listen to you all. to listen to your feedbacks, what you've got to share, and how this journey has been beneficial. As one of our participants has mentioned, if at all the fact that we're recording is a barrier, I think we can request for Foss to pause the recording, because we would love to listen to your honest feedback, your genuine feedbacks, and know how the session, 7 days worth of journey, has touched your lives. So yes, I want to kick the ball back to your coach, to all our participants here. Please do raise your hand whenever you're ready, and please do share it in your chat box as well. How has the Metanoia journey touched your life, and how do you hope to continue this journey of spreading light? At the same time, as we move forward, I'll also be gradually inviting, I think I'll hand it over to you, Fatima Aida. She is one of the strongest pillars behind the entire journey of Metanoia. I think I'll hand it over to you, and we'll listen to you.